I think one of the challenges we have, COP26 is really highlighted the issue the world really has, and we have to somehow find a way of reducing our emissions and taking the planet down by 1.5 degrees. If we don't do that, then there are some catastrophic outcomes for both our children and our children's children. There are a lot of pledges being made, as we see over the last week, and will be made so going forward by the various nations. And a lot of these are quite way into the distance. But actually, one of the key things for us is what we can do today and how we can move things forward. One of the challenges, I think, at the moment is when you look at what the grid is doing. To make the lights work, to make this program work, to try and make my presentation work, which it wouldn't do, the grid actually is broken down to, and you can go to a really good website which shows you the national grid and its current usage and how it's broken down. As it stands at the moment, 65% of what we're currently using right at this moment in time is fossil fuels. It's predominantly gas with about 4% coal. We've actually put 2 coal-fired generations back online in the Nottinghamshire area because of the crisis we've got with gas at this moment in time. So 2/3 of what we're currently using today is fossil fuel related. The challenge that the UK has is our renewables, which would be our wind and solar, can make up to 40%. But we live in the northern hemisphere. It's not always sunny, and when you're reliant on the elements, you have to be able to store what you actually make at a moment in time to use through the grid and transmute it through the grid. So we have some real challenges going forward in terms of what we're doing. We currently have over 10,000 wind turbines in the UK. We would need over 50,000 to be self-generating. So we would have to have 5 times where we currently are. Now, the solution won't be one particular piece. The government has actually gone on record that it wants to be totally renewable by 2035. But what does it mean by renewable? It doesn't mean green. That will include nuclear as part of what we're doing, and Hinkley Point C is due to come on stream in 2026. So there are some challenges in where we're going and what we're doing. If we then turn to business and the challenge that business has, if you look at our estate is made up of businesses, sites from the Industrial Revolution right through to today. So we will have a very old stock in terms of the UK. And if you go across certainly the schools place and the education place, they will have Victorian buildings right through to modern day buildings. Now you would expect modern day buildings to be built with better specifications for energy efficiency. But we do have a challenge in dealing with our old stock and also dealing with the fact that we need to replace gas. Now, with the government saying by 2035, we're going to be renewable, that means gas will have to be taken out of the generation piece. Now, that is going to be huge. Now, most modern day boilers can convert to hydrogen, and that will be one of the solutions that will come on board sometime over the next decade. Currently, if you look at where we're at, it's all about really understanding your site and where you're currently based and what it's capable of in terms of its sustainability credentials. Looking at whether the roof can take solar, whether or not we can look at LED lighting, whether we can look at other variations like ground source heat pumps, air source heat pumps. All of those things will be used to replace gas over time, but also I think hydrogen will be one of the main factors that we'll have to develop. The big challenge, I think, for the UK is that we're not self-sufficient in energy procurement or energy. The big issue for us is that on a daily basis, over half of our gas comes either from Russia, Norway, or the Ukraine. On top of that, we have pipes running under the North Sea, running under the English Channel that actually trade energy between parts of Europe. So for us to go to carbon neutral, we have to become self-sustainable in energy, and that really is a challenge for the UK as we currently stand. That will need a lot of investment in terms of where we are. Now, what we have seen, and I was chatting earlier in one of the rooms, we've seen over the last 3 to 4 months a real high spike in gas prices, and in turn in energy prices, electricity prices as a spin-off of that. What we have seen is that gas prices are up between 400 and 500% in just 4 months. And from a business point of view, if you're then having to buy that, that is taking away profit from your business. So that is a real challenge for us right at this moment in time. Electricity prices have doubled over the same period. Now, we've also seen a number of failures in the energy supply market. 16 companies so far have failed this year. We're about to see another go. For those of you in the gas market, contracts for natural gas will cease trading in the next 2 weeks, we believe. They currently have 45,000 business clients. So now, what I would say, and we've dropped a post out on this, you will not lose supply if your supplier fails. Ofgem have things in place so that supply is maintained throughout. It will just mean you will transfer to another supplier, but you may or may not be in a place where your contract is honoured. You may go into what they call variable rates, and then you will need to look for a new contract. Now, one of the big differences between the domestic market and the commercial market is the domestic market is capped. So at the moment, the general public isn't really seeing the increase in the market that the business world is seeing. The cap is due to be increased in April, but the worst time usually for energy prices is through the winter because demand is just greater. So that will be a challenge for us. Now, trying to look at the energy market and give you some understanding of what you actually have and what you may have bought is quite a challenge. Energy suppliers have usually 4 or more contracts that you can purchase in the commercial space. And the best way of sort of putting them together and getting you to understand how they might operate is to use an analogy of a holiday. When you go on holiday, if you buy an all-inclusive holiday, you know what you're going to spend. You can also buy something called full board, half board, or room only. Now, energy contracts work on a similar basis. You can have something called fully fixed, which is the energy market's version of all-inclusive. The price is the price and will remain fixed through the duration of the contract. Full board means is a term we can align to fixed and inclusive, where you have an element of the energy price fixed, but a part of it is just forecasted, and the supplier can and will increase prices if they have their forecasts wrong. So it means that you're budgeting, you need to be mindful of what you're buying. Half board would be aligned to the fixed market, where the commodity element is fixed, but the government taxes are not. And they can be quite restrictive in terms of overall cost. And finally, you have something called a room only, or what we call a pass-through, where nothing is fixed. And literally your price will vary every month on what you're paying. And a lot of businesses buy energy on price. You look at the price of the quote you're given and you go by price. We would recommend never, ever buy solely on price. You have to look at what is in the terms and conditions and what is fixed in your product and what is not. Because otherwise you'll get your budgeting wrong and you will end up paying a lot more than you first anticipated. The easiest way of looking at it is when you get your bill through each month, if you're running a business, you should have the following. You will have the day rate, night rate. You will have something called KVA. KVA is the allowance. Every building in the UK has an energy allowance. That allows the grid to say we have sufficient power in that sector, in that area of the country, to make sure all the lights work and everything works. Then you will have something called climate control levy, which everybody pays. Then you'll have VAT, and then you'll have a bill. Anything else that you have on that bill means you're being charged for things in a contract that is not fully fixed. If you want people like ourselves to look at that, we can give you an overview of what your contract is doing and what the risks are for your contract. The problem with prices, the reason prices are often cheaper is there's more risk built into the contract, where the supplier can and will reconcile to actually make sure they keep their costs aligned. So you need to be really careful in terms of what you're buying in the energy market. The last piece I really wanted to cover was really around where we go in terms of net zero and what COP26 is trying to achieve. I think the challenge that all businesses have is there is a perception, and has been for some time, that green or renewables can be deemed to be expensive. What we have seen, I think, over the last few years is a lot more support for that marketplace, both in terms of funding and in terms of financing. So, for example, you can put solar panels on a large industrial roof and not pay for them. They're paid for by the supplier, who then sells you the cheaper energy it makes, which can be up to 40% below what you pay for in the market. So, and that is with no capital outlay. So there are some quite creative schemes out there in terms of renewables that will help a business deal with its carbon footprint. Looking at where we get to in terms of overall things for you to consider, the key thing is around budget. It's about really looking at what you're trying to do, but I would go right back to the very basics of understanding what your site is actually using. Everybody has a monthly energy bill, whether it's electricity or whether it's gas. That will tell you what your output is each month, what you're actually using, what you're using from the grid. What it won't tell you is what your site is, how your site is using it. So, for example, those of you who have a manufacturing process, your machinery will use an element of electricity, your lights, your heating, and there is kit that can be put on site to measure that. So it can start looking at, as Brendan was saying, and what Xerox were doing, is actually measuring what's actually happening on site and making sure that you're making your site as efficient as possible. A lot of businesses have business management systems. The challenge we have is, when were they last aligned to the business? And often we see when we go into businesses that the heating's coming on at 2 a.m. on a Sunday morning, and there's no logic to why that is actually happening. So the key always is to make sure that you have the ability to manage your site and bring down your costs. Because the good thing about it is, if you reduce costs, reduce usage, you'll reduce costs. The things go hand in hand. So from a budgeting point of view, you can look at moving to net zero as a positive of taking costs out of your business, rather than it being a cost to your business. And that's really where the mindset needs to shift. The other thing I think that is really important in terms of business is to look at your clients. Your clients will have their own CSR policy, their corporate social responsibility policy. And that might be that they're moving towards net zero. They're looking at where they go. And if you don't, then if you don't align with your clients, you could lose that contract long term. So be mindful of the fact that we're seeing more and more now in contracts elements around green credentials, around net zero, around the journey that companies are taking for in terms of carbon emissions. And again, groups like ours can help with that thought process to make sure that you secure the work that you need to keep your business in business. So that's really, really important. I think the other key thing is also that any plan is not going to happen overnight. It's all about making a start. And also it's very important to get your workforce, your stakeholders and your clients involved in this, because if you do that, then we all win. And I think that's the key thing in going forward. It's to make sure that you take everybody on a journey and you have a very simple plan to get to net zero. Now, the larger companies like the Xeroxes of this world and other groups in that space, they've had regulation in place for a number of years in terms of dealing with energy management. And they have compliance issues in place, often run by the Environment Agency, where they run things like a 4-year rolling plan called ESOS, or Energy Savings Opportunity Schemes, where they have to comply by law. And there are 7,500 businesses in the UK that complete an ESOS audit every 4 years. On top of that, an extra piece of legislation that came in 2018 and went live in 2019 is something called Streamline Energy Carbon Reporting, or SECRA. Now, for businesses in that space, they have to report in their accounts their carbon footprint. There's a formula they use in terms of scope 1, which is gas, scope 2, which is electricity, scope 3, which is other, which actually then shows their CO2 usage. Now, that formula can be applied to any business. But again, another 7,500 companies have to comply with this already. And a lot of where we're going to get to in terms of carbon management is around actually understanding where we are and where we're trying to get to. And that's really, really important in terms of the long-term future of the planet. So really, in summary today, for me, firstly, apologies for the slides. I will send them round to everybody. But the key for it is really to have a plan in terms of where you are in energy management. If your energy contract is due for renewal, then this is a difficult time. The market is very expensive at this moment in time. If your energy contract is renewable later into the new year, what we're seeing at the moment is energy prices will remain fairly high through to about April time. That's what the forecasters are telling us. And then they'll come off a little bit from April. But if you're buying a contract today, which is over a year or 2 years, that's taken into account in the cost of the contract, because they actually look at what they're forward buying when they put together a rate. The issue will be, if you're going to buy right at this moment in time, think about maybe a slightly longer term contract. It will water down the initial costs. So as a simple example, we had a client only a couple of days ago whereby the 12-month cost was £100,000 just over. The 2-year cost, the 24-month cost was £80,000. So it was taking £20,000 off. Yes, you paid £100,000, but it means the second year was £60,000, and they've averaged it out. So from a cash flow point of view, it helps you with a longer term contract when the market is high. Be also mindful if you have contracts with things like volume tolerance in. Look at the terms and conditions. Energy companies at this moment in time are applying volume tolerance. Volume tolerance is whereby you have committed in your contract to use a certain level of energy. If you use less than that, they will charge you up to that level. So it's really important you understand what you're buying. And one of the challenges the comparison sites struggle with is this type of terminology to understand what's really happening. So that'll probably give you an overall view of where we're at in terms of the market. But look, thank you for your time today. I'm going to hand back to Brendan. Thank you.